All right, we are going to get started. Welcome everyone. My name is John Simpson. I'm the CEO of RentReporters, and I'm just super happy that all you guys could join us today. This is just such a timely topic, obviously, and I'm very excited to introduce Amy Thomann from TransUnion, who's going to be my co-host today. So give her a big warm shout out. Amy is head of consumer credit education at TransUnion. Her mission in life is really to educate and empower so that you're able to take better control of your financial life. And education is absolutely the way to do it. So as just by way of can you say hello to everybody, Amy?
Hi, everyone. Nice to have you all here today. Looking forward to having this conversation.
So just as a quick housekeeping item, everyone, you're all on mute, and if you go to the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a chat section. So feel free to submit questions via chat, and we're going to get to as many of those today as we can. And for those that we're not able to, we will follow up with you in email response to your question. And then we're also going to look to, we'll find a place for all of those questions and answers to live on the RentReporters website. And we'll forward that information to you as well in terms of where to find that. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda today. RentReporters did a survey a few weeks back and asked many of you what was on your mind, what you're worried about. And there's no question that there's a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty that we all share in terms of our financial outlook. But one of the things that came out very loud and clear in our survey is that many of you didn't know where to start or what to do next. And you didn't know what the consequence of action or inaction is. So what we're going to do today is really get into the practical. We're not going to stay down in the theoretical. We're going to talk about the basics. We're going to talk about accommodations. We're going to throw out some words like forbearance, and don't worry, Amy's going to be the one that explains all those to us. But we're going to talk about what conversation should you be having with your landlord if you're concerned about not being able to pay your rent. Or maybe it is that you can pay your rent, but you're not able to pay your whole credit card bill. So we're going to talk about how do we come start having those conversations with our landlord, with our lenders. What should we ask? What should we offer in terms of an explanation of our own personal circumstance? And really give you very clear action steps so that you can leave today and go put them to work and make your financial life a bit better. But it's all about resetting and planning on building out of this crisis and not being solely a victim of it. So I already covered my housekeeping on messages. So look for your chat button down at the bottom of your screen. So Amy, I know I'm going to kick it over to you here. As I mentioned, RentReporters did a survey a few weeks back, really just looking to take the temperature of our RentReporters customer base and understand what they're going through. TransUnion did a national study they just released on Friday, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually been doing this study every week through the end of May, and then we just released our June study on Friday. So we've been watching trends over time throughout the COVID-19 pandemic.
And what was the big takeaway for you in that study? What story is it telling in terms of our audience today? Are they alone?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question and a great place to start. Ultimately, these types of situation, although we hear we're all in this together, it can be easy to feel alone because, it's difficult to have, financial hardships, be losing jobs, things like that. But ultimately, our study that just released on Friday showed that 58% of Americans are currently being impacted by this pandemic. So, I mean, that's just a massive number when you think about all 300 million people. 58% are feeling some type of impact. And, over 70% of those who've been impacted are worried about paying at least some type of bill and loan. So this is just unprecedented. I know that's a term that's been thrown around a lot, but ultimately, we really are all seeing that almost everyone, more than half of people are impacted and are trying to figure out what they can do next to protect and manage their situation during such a financial crisis.
It really is about protection. That's one of the things that's happened with this virus, is that we really focus on protecting ourselves, protecting our physical health, and it's so important to protect our financial health as well, because it's so easy to lose sight and focus on the here and now and not really keep your eye on the long term. But when you think about this environment, is it one-sided, Amy? Is it really is it the consumers out there that are afraid and most impacted, or in this case, we're talking about rent or tenants and landlords? Are landlords impacted here?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially those who are independent landlords, who own their own home potentially and are also renting out homes. But even property managers and businesses, everyone is feeling the impact of this. That 58% of Americans includes people who own businesses and small businesses, as well as landlords as well. So, it's important as part of this conversation to make sure that we're thinking about the fact that we really are all feeling this. And so when having those conversations with lenders and the people that you're working with to pay bills, that, we all kind of understand what's happening right now. And we've never been through it before, but, there's a sense of empathy that, that landlords are probably having, but as well as that if you are talking to your landlord, you want to have that empathy for your landlord as well, that they may be struggling to pay their bills.
One of the things, that's a great point, Amy. And I think there's a misunderstanding out there when it comes to the landlord community. Roughly half of the units that are offered for rent in the country are owned by larger institutional property owners. Maybe those companies are public, maybe they're part of a REIT. But the other half are those independents that you describe. And those are the folks that, they're going paycheck to paycheck for their mortgage as well. So it's just important to keep that in mind, because you may be, for our audience, they may be talking to someone with their landlord or in their landlord who is scared too. And one of the things we want to help is to calm down the conversation, because two people that are scared can quite often not communicate very effectively. So that's why we're pointing that out to all of you. So Amy, what about, as we think about tenants and landlords, what do we think, what are some of the what are some of the accommodations, what are some of the things that we might want to start talking to our landlord about if we're having difficulty paying our commitments or making good on our commitments? What should that conversation look like with our landlord?
Sure, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of news out there about, the CARES Act and all of the legislation that's in place. And, that's a pretty complex situation. So I want to talk about things that are, a little closer to home that you can do regardless of the legislation that's ongoing, essentially. So first, make the call, put in an email. To explain your situation, reach out and just ask for a conversation with your landlord. Again, understanding they may be in the same situation or a similar situation, and start talking to them about first, here's what I'm going through. Explain you've lost your job, you've had hours reduced, your partner has lost their job, whatever it may be, and talk to them about, the need for some kind of assistance, and explain, that you want to help, you want to work with them to build a plan for how, you guys can come to a compromise and have a plan for both relief right now for you, if you need it, as well as something that's manageable and doable for that landlord as well. And I think that's your starting point ultimately, is just having that conversation, because your landlord can't help if they don't know what's going on.
And that's really right. And I think, we're going to say it over and over again today, the importance of communication. And it's humbling, I understand, but it's very important that that our audience lays out exactly what they're going through. and don't sugarcoat it. It's really important that they understand that it's really a can't of what you can't do as opposed to a won't. Because unfortunately, there are people trying to take advantage of this crisis as a way to get a concession from their creditor or their landlord. So authenticity, sincerity is hugely important in this conversation. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Amy. Just, you got to pick up the phone. That's gonna be our mantra. Pick up the phone and call them and start the conversation. Email, you just got to let them know. The one thing we learned from our last financial crisis over 10 years ago was the importance of just talking. That if you owe someone money and they're not hearing from you, you're taking away their options. That forces them to think the worst. So communicate and then really assess what you need. Right, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I read through your RentReporters study as well. And it's from that survey, it looked like only 24% of people have in that survey had discussed rent accommodations with their landlords, you know? So that means there's a huge runway for people to still, you know, be talking. We haven't had those conversations yet. Let's have those conversations first and see what kind of plan can be developed, you know? It may need to be flexible, but, you know, that conversation is the starting point.
Okay, so I've emailed my landlord and I've explained that my partner lost their job. I'm under tremendous financial stress and I need your help, Mr. or Mrs. Landlord. And the landlord says, okay, what do you want? What should be the next step once you lay out your problem, your circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think then you have to be really realistic about what you need, you know? If there's a situation that, you know, maybe they first offer, you know, okay, you don't have to pay rent at all for 4 months, but at the end of that 4 months, you're going to need to, you know, pay all of the rent. Well, that may not be a reasonable situation for you because that's a lot of money then at the end of a 4-month period that you may still not be able to come up with. So then it's about discussing what you can realistically do. And again, remembering that a landlord wants a reliable and stable tenant just as much as you want a reliable and stable home. And so ultimately, maybe even saying, you know, look, I would like to, here's what I can pay at the end of this period. You know, how can we make this work for both of us? Is there, you know, a longer term lease I can sign? Is there, you know, are there late fees that we can reduce because that will reduce the total? It's really about creating your options and just going back and forth with the landlord so that it's realistic for both of you, essentially.
Got it. So Amy, can I say it this way then? So I've emailed my landlord and I've explained my circumstance. Is the first place, let me just try to break this down into smaller steps for our audience. Is the first question, or should the first question be, landlord, what can you do for me, do you think? Or should it be, here's what I need? What should go first? Should the landlord be offering, should you be asking what they're able to do for you?
So I think that's a great question. And again, in some places it depends on the legislation. There may be certain moratoriums on things or things like that. In that case, the landlord should be offering you what is available. However, in a lot of cases, you know, there are still independent choices to be made. And that's where you can take the ownership over your situation. Again, your landlord doesn't know your financial situation until you've talked to them. And so I think that's when you approach them and say, look, this is what's reasonable for me. Is it possible to, you know, use this as a starting point so that then we can determine what my payback plan or, you know, rent deferral will be.
Okay, so let's then talk about really specific to that landlord tenant, that lease relationship. So if we're thinking about some of the things our audience will want to talk about, so we obviously have rent. So let's talk about the difference, maybe Amy first, of the difference between abating rent versus a deferral of rent. Or if you think of it, you know, abatement as a forgiveness, what's the difference between those two things?
Sure. I mean, if it's a rent forgiveness or abatement, that means that you probably don't have to pay it back. You should always make sure of that and make sure you're very clear on the terms. Ask the questions to make sure you understand what's going to happen at the end of that term. But generally, that means, okay, you get rent, a payment holiday or an abatement for 3 months. That probably means most likely that you don't have to pay it back. A deferral means that you are going to still owe that amount of money at some point, but there may be flexibility in how you can pay that back. And that may be the discussion that you need to have to really get into the details.
There's actually a great Wall Street Journal article on that concept of deferral a week or two ago. And there was a church organist who had lost his job, and his landlord had offered to defer their rent for the next 4 months. And the organist in the article said, well, that's great, but how in the world am I going to pay back 4 months of rent on my 5th month? And that's not realistic. So that's where it's important to make sure, a good example of does that work for you? And there's a big difference, as Amy said, between a deferral and you can pay me tomorrow instead of today, or next month instead of today, but you still owe the money. And you need to be realistic about whether or not you're going to be able to pay that back, because all you've done is pushed your problem a couple of months away. We really want you to focus on solving your entire problem today, which means coming up with an arrangement that you will be able to live by. So, but if we're in a situation where you really need a rent abatement, you need them to forgive that rent, you're gonna have to give that landlord a very good reason to do that. Because as Amy said earlier, they're in it for the good paying, the tenant that is going to occupy that unit and pay their rent. So if it's a place you want to stay, one of the things that Amy was alluding to is maybe you want to offer to extend your lease. Maybe you want to extend it out a year, and maybe you're going to ask that landlord to forgive 2 months of rent or 3 months of rent if once you make good on the following 12 months. So be creative. Don't be thinking about your personal situation and be creative about what works for you. But you do have something to trade. You are a good paying tenant and they want you. So, use that for leverage. Use that to help get you what you need. Does that resonate, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always about that conversation and taking that step to take control of your own situation, not waiting for someone else to do it for you, and, determining what you can and should be in control of.
Got it. So I've seen, Amy, an awful lot of talk out there about evictions, eviction moratoriums, people very much worried about being evicted. Can you talk a little bit about just the national landscape there? I know there's some laws that they've put on the books to help residents. Can you talk just at a very high level about just kind of what the national discussion there is, some of those laws?
Sure, absolutely. So there are some of those laws in place as related to the CARES Act. They're around federally backed, insured, and mortgaged properties. So that's pretty complex. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail there. But, there are also a lot of state, city, county resources available that may be more specific than the national one to your, locale. So it actually, another option in terms of eviction moratoriums, rent relief, those types of things. If you're interested in looking into that, you can honestly just Google your state, city, county, Department of Housing, Department of Social Services, Human Services, they all have slightly different names. Or Google, your city or state and the term rent relief, or city and state and the term eviction moratorium. Usually that first page of results will bring up some type of .gov or .org page that outlines, every city and state right now has a COVID-19 support center in some way. So if you're Googling for it, look for the Department of Housing, Department of Social or Human Services, and see what is in place in your individual city, state, or county, because it's all different. It continues to change. Some are extending them, some are cutting them off at this point. So you just need to do the research a little bit, and it's generally pretty easy to find because these cities and states are trying to provide relief and make it clear to people what's available.
Got it. So just as another administrator or housekeeping item I should have covered at the beginning, I do hear my dog Rosie wandering around the house. So if the doorbell rings, she's going to bark. I apologize. But she's Rosie, sweet dog. So look for her. But so as we're talking about evictions though, and moratoriums, we really want this group to avoid that conversation at all costs. That's what's going to happen, or that's kind of the eventuality if you're not having that conversation with your landlord. And Amy said this, and I want to make sure everyone heard it. Keep negotiating, keep talking. Don't look at it as you have to accept what the landlord is offering as being their only offer. Continue to talk and work them towards what works for you. Really important here. We want that eviction moratorium to be there as really a theoretical option. We want you really to take control so that eviction never even comes about. And merely as we talked about with that organist, we don't want you just to be piling up unpaid rent that you're going to owe back. We want you to get that rent abated, reduced today. And that's an important part of it. So Amy, do you think have we covered enough on just the conversation between tenant and landlord? Is there anything there in terms of that we need to add or expand or develop?
No, I think we've covered that. I think it's important to get into, more broadly how to cover the entire share of your wallet. I know rent is a massive part of people's budget, including my own. But ultimately, if there are financial difficulties right now, which is understandable, we have a lot of other bills and loans to pay. And so I think we can maybe talk a little bit about how you can get some support there as well.
Yeah, so much of the national conversation has been around just the landlord just paying that rent or the renegotiating your rent. But really what we want to do is to solve your entire problem with everything available in your arsenal. So perhaps you have a credit card bill, perhaps you have a car insurance payment, auto loan. Those other things you're paying all come out of your budget, obviously. So we want you to have that same conversation, I think, Amy, with all of your lenders and prioritize it, I think, based on your largest spend to your smallest spend. But maybe you don't get everything you need out of your landlord, but perhaps you're getting it out of your auto insurance of all things. Amy, what have you seen have you seen anything on the auto insurance front?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, personally, my auto insurer, they proactively reached out and provided a credit to my account because they were like, people aren't driving as much right now. We understand that. We're trying to help support you. And of course, for car insurance companies, they have less risk because of less driving. So, it was a small credit, but at the same time, there was that proactive, positive support from a company. I've heard anecdotally that other car insurers are doing similar things. So even if your car insurance company hasn't reached out, that might be an option for you to contact them and see if that's possible by explaining, if you're still working from home or if you've lost your job and are not, driving as much right now. Again, explaining that situation, there may be terms you can come to with that particular company.
It really, we hosted a webinar a year or so ago, Amy, and obviously far earlier than, way before this crisis hit. But it really was interesting. The conversation was around, again, in a normal environment, most businesses, most lenders, companies are able to accommodate requests for reductions in good times, fee reductions. That's something they do. I didn't say that very well, so I'll try it again. So the idea is that you want to get the best possible price you can for everything you're buying and on the best terms. And you can go back and renegotiate that today if you need to. But so let's say if we're talking about our cable bill, yes, I would think it would be a good idea to call Spectrum or Cox, whoever it is, and say, I need a temporary reduction in my bill. That's a good place to start. Auto insurance, a great place to be. Credit card bill, same thing, I think, right, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you're going to have any sort of difficulty paying your bill on time, you should absolutely reach out to the company that you have the account with before you miss the payment. You know, and if you've already missed a payment, all is not lost. Reach out to them now before you miss another payment. You know, we've actually seen that this financial situation and health crisis has 60% of Americans, of financially impacted Americans, have reached out to their lenders and, you know, bill corp companies to discuss their payment options. And 25% of all Americans, whether they've been impacted or not, have received some type of financial accommodation, you know, since, you know, mid-March, when this really got big. And so, you know, right now we're seeing that these accommodations are very much available to people if you reach out and if you talk to those lenders and companies that you have accounts with, because again, we are all having the same situation. And so those accommodations are available to you if you reach out and explain. So that's the key.
And I think, Amy, the timing of it is so important, because one of the things you're seeing in the background is this economy is reopening, that people are starting to feel better. And right now, I think this is unprecedented, a word that, as Amy said, is, you know, often used and perhaps overused. It's unprecedented, no question, but this is going to pass. And so it's important for this audience, for me, is to go, oh, there's Rosie walking by. The importance for this audience is to do it now, because lenders are not going to be as open 60 days from now. Your landlord's not going to be open in 60 days from now as they are now, as our economy reopens and things move back towards normal. So doing something today is hugely important. Act while you can. That's what the old TV offer said, right? Act now.
Yeah.
So Amy, what about then? So now this audience has done exactly what we asked them to do. They went and they contacted their credit card company. They got a reduction in their interest rate, which was interesting that they thought to ask for, because that's one of the things the credit card companies can do. Doesn't mean they will, but they got a reduction in their interest rate, and they got a payment holiday for 2 months, let's say. Mm-hmm. What just happened to their credit? Did they blow their credit up?
So the good news is that's why we're recommending that you reach out and talk to those lenders before you miss a payment. You know, payment history is the most important factor in your credit score, and is a really key element of your credit report, which, you know, is what goes into your credit score essentially. And so by reaching out, getting those accommodations, then you can also ask your lender, you know, how will this accommodation be reported to the credit reporting agencies? You can ask them, you know, how long will it take effect, and how will this show up on my credit report? You can ask them those questions because ultimately you want to be able to confirm that you understood the terms correctly, which, you know, we know you're asking those questions, that they're reporting it the way they say they're going to, and that you're checking your credit report regularly, which I'll get into in a second, to make sure that it's being reported correctly, and that you can start looking at all of your accounts, you know, all of your credit accounts, whether that's an auto loan, you know, a credit card bill, student loan, etc., and look at all of those, get your contact information for your lenders on that report, and be able to start building that plan for once you're out of these accommodations. You know, I think that's just it. It's really important to check your credit report. I'm not sure I've totally answered your question, so if you want me to get into that, I can.
Well, I think you have. So the idea is that during this crisis, during this period of financial crisis, that the financial institutions know how to report, and there are specific reporting guidelines in terms of how to report an accommodation. And I think, Amy, what you've told me is that as long as you're following that accommodation, so what you'll see on your credit report is that yes, there's an accommodation there, and that you are fulfilling it. But what are some of those? And so in that case, that's not going to have again, the idea is to explain that, yes, you've reached an accommodation with the lender and you're paying it as agreed. That is very different than just paying half of your bill and not having an agreement from your lender, correct?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why we encourage reaching out before you miss a payment, because then, that reporting will be on your report, and it won't show a past due payment, which could then impact your credit score negatively because it's such an important factor.
So that's, one of the things that may very well have happened, Amy, is that one of our audience members may have already missed a payment. Mm-hmm. Does that mean just forget about it and just stop paying it? I've already done the damage. There's no more damage I can do. What's your advice if they have missed a payment?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've already missed a payment, it happens. It happens to everyone at some point. I mean, not everyone, but most people. So, again, it's not going to tank your score forever. It's not going to tank your credit forever. But the most important thing then is to either get a financial accommodation if you need one by talking to your lender, see what can be put in place and whatnot. Maybe even explain to your lender what happened in the previous payment. I can't guarantee that will help, but again, those conversations could help at this time when they know how long this particular situation has been going on. But secondly, don't do nothing. That's the worst thing to do. Ultimately, you want to either talk to your lender, get an accommodation if you can, or start making some payments. If you're also, maybe your situation's changed and you're able to make payments now. But ultimately, the more non-payments or missed payments that you have, the more detrimental that will be to your credit health. And so, even if you've missed one, that's okay. It's not the end of the world, but take control now before it gets further down the line.
Got it. And so just as, again, kind of more of a housekeeping item for our audience, on the rent accommodation side, RentReporters has you covered. So we'll be reporting that properly. If you reach an accommodation with your landlord, don't worry, we got you covered on that. Okay, Amy, so we're just about halfway through, a little more than halfway through our webinar today. So we've talked about going back with talking with our landlord. We've talked about going through your wallet, your checkbook, every bill that you're paying. We've talked about going and asking for an accommodation there. And we've talked about the differences between abatement, forgiving the amounts you owe, versus merely deferring them, and you owe that at some point down the road. So they've made their phone calls. They've reached they've achieved some accommodations. Now what? Are they all good now, or is there something else lurking out there waiting to bite them?
So I think that first, once you've gotten an accommodation, make sure to start building your plan for when those end. Don't just put this on pause and say this is handled. Make sure that you're starting to think about what your plans are and how you can make your payments, at that later date. It's important to not just forget about it, because that will just cause problems later. But then secondly, not related to your payment structure, I would say that, we are seeing an increase in fraud scams that are out there right now, as in any type of natural or health situation, natural disaster or health situation. Fraudsters are taking advantage of this moment, knowing that people are worried. And so there are steps you can take to protect yourself from that a little more. And again, take control of your personal information, your credit health, so that others can't take advantage of you as much.
So what are some of those options then, in terms of, as we think about fraud specifically, because that's one of the cruel things that happens in hard times, that people use a crisis to defraud people. What can this group do to protect themselves? What are some good steps to make sure they don't become a victim? Sure,
absolutely. So first of all, just be careful with emails and phone calls, the normal, check your passwords, those types of things. You hear it a lot, but it is important. And especially right now, there are a lot of phishing schemes out there around PPE, COVID-19 tests, the CARES Act and stimulus checks. So just make sure that they're from legitimate sources. That's the first thing. Secondly, if you're not planning on applying for new credit anytime soon, I would recommend that you may want to consider freezing your credit. So basically, a credit freeze prevents fraudsters or anyone who's not you from opening new accounts in your name. And because it prevents lenders from seeing your credit report, new lenders from seeing your credit report after they receive a new credit application. And so that's a really important step. It's really easy to do online at TransUnion, at least. And credit freezes are free. They don't affect your credit score. So it's a really easy step to take if you're not going to be applying for new credit anytime soon, because it just basically freezes down your report and makes sure that people can't get access to it.
Got it. And so did we talk about, I'm sorry, I apologize, Amy, did you touch on where to go on the free credit score?
I didn't, but I know that you guys offer it.
Yeah, would you mind touching on some of the tools out there? I know for our RentReporters customers, we're providing their credit score each and every month. So that's a good place to look as a red flag, but we really want to get down into the details of that credit report, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. And the good news is the reason you want to check first of all, the reason you want to check your credit report, your score is a great indicator for you, but your report is, all of the information in your report is what factors into your credit score. So your report is really the basis of the information that's going into your score. So that's why you want to check it, first of all. Secondly, the good news is that we know that accessing your credit information is really important, especially right now as you're trying to protect yourself. So all three of the credit reporting agencies, that's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, are offering all people, all Americans, free weekly credit reports from annualcreditreport.com through April 2021. So this is like almost a full year of weekly credit reports. And essentially, that will give you the access you need whenever you want, weekly, as often as a weekly. But you may want to check it monthly. You can check it weekly if you want. But lenders generally report monthly. So you may want to check it at least monthly and check that everything's being reported properly. Once you've gotten those accommodations, make sure that there's no fraud or new accounts that you don't recognize, and just check through that information, make sure everything is accurate. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, all your lender's contact information is also on that report. So it can make it really easy to contact your lender either to make accommodations or as you approach the end of an accommodation and you may need to have a discussion with them about what's next.
Got it. Makes perfect sense. And I am one of those people who is an over checker of my credit for sure. So no harm in doing it once a month as people are reporting, but really just get used to seeing it and educate, educate yourself on what's there, what's being reported. That's a great way in terms of just boosting your credit IQ for sure. So I'm just going to do a quick recap, and we have some questions coming in, but again, the key messages here, gang, are get out there after this webinar and start talking by email or by phone, and make sure that you're asking for what you need. And think about your entire wallet. If you should have a financial goal of what you need to help what do you need in the way of accommodations that allows you to meet all of your obligations? That's just hugely important. So if you know that you're short $1,000, or you expect to be short $1,000 each month for the next 3 months, let's make sure that that's your goal, that you're looking to get $1,000 worth of accommodations from all of the people in your wallet, all of the people you're paying your bills for. And that will help ensure better success because you're not trying to get it all from one place. So make sure you're doing that. And then, we talked about that, making sure we're getting that accommodation in writing. Although actually, Amy, I don't think we covered that. what should we do? What should they do when they reach an accommodation? How do they document that new understanding? How do they make sure they have a real agreement there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most lenders will automatically provide it in writing, but at the same time, make sure you ask for that. Make sure are they emailing it to you? Are they mailing it through, the postal service? Make sure you know how it's coming to you and that you do receive it, and make sure you read through it too, to make sure that it accurately documents what you've discussed, and that you understand all the terms, especially the repayment terms, if available. And then with lenders, it might not be as formal. So make sure that you do ask for that. It's, just simply ask for it in writing, with a signature from your landlord or your property management company. And, that way you have something to reference down the road, and you are also ensured that you're both on the same page.
Yeah, and that's important because the person you may have been talking to may have left and there may be someone new. So you're getting that in writing, hugely important. So then we said, okay, so you've asked for the accommodation, you've achieved your $1,000 a month goal, which is fantastic. You've got that in writing, and now you've followed Amy's advice. You've checked that credit report, make sure that you're not going to become a victim of fraud and your credit's going to be destroyed to no fault of your own. So I think we got people on a pretty good path now, and we made sure, again, talking about auto loans, talking about auto insurance, make sure to look everywhere in your wallet. So let me go. I have a few questions. Amy, is there anything that I didn't touch on for this group that you think that we need to highlight?
I think just, we were talking so much about fraud that I want to make sure that if someone does feel that they've already become a victim of fraud, make sure that you, a good recommendation is to put a free fraud alert on your credit report as well. That's also free. An initial one lasts for 1 year, and it doesn't block lenders entirely. So you can still, get new loans or credit cards if you need them, but it just makes sure that lenders take some extra steps to verify your identity when they do get a new, credit application in your name. So if you do feel like you've already become a victim, I don't want to only address anyone who's trying to protect themselves proactively, but also, if you think that's happened to you, make sure you go and put a fraud alert on your account with all the credit reporting agencies.
Got it. So now I have a couple of questions that came in. We don't have much time left, but I think we can take a couple. So I'm just gonna turn away and read a couple. The first one, it says, what should I do to keep my credit score increasing? I always pay my payments on time, and most of them I pay before the due date, but my credit score is not going up. I think I can take that one, Amy. As we're looking at your credit report, your credit score, what Amy said is that payment history is hugely important. So it sounds like this audience member is got that part covered. They're making their payments on time, but then frustrated by not seeing the score go up. Well, one of the things you want to look at is if you have a credit card, what percentage of your credit line are you using? You're gonna want, if your credit line's $1,000 and you owe $1,000, you've used up your entire credit line, that's not going to be positive for your credit score. That's going to hurt your score. So you want to make sure that you are only using a percentage of your credit available each and every month. And that's one of the things that the algorithm, the score algorithm, will look to. Of what percentage of your available credit are you using? The more you're using, the more of a risk you appear to be, and the lower your score. So that's one thing I can suggest for that audience member. Amy, anything to add?
I think just related to that credit utilization, which is kind of the formal term for it, is that generally experts agree, based on the algorithms and things like that, that a goal should be to keep that utilization as low as possible, but certainly under 30% if you're able.
Under 30% of
of your total credit availability.
So if I had a credit line of $1,000, I should be trying to not use more than $300 at that $1,000 credit line?
Generally speaking, yes, that's the advice that's given.
Got it. And so if people are in a rebuilding mode, Amy, then is that something they should be aspiring to, meaning looking to pay down some of that debt to get it to the 30% level?
So, payment history is the most important. So I think the first thing is to make sure that you are paying on time and as much as possible in full. Of course, we know that's not totally possible right now, especially. But again, that's why we've had this whole discussion today. So payment history is the most important, but yes, generally speaking, trying to get that credit utilization below 30% of your total available credit it's a pretty important factor in the scoring models, generally speaking. And so that can also be, a beneficial, tool that you're using from your point of view is, use less credit, and generally that's helpful.
Got it. Another question says, what do you think about asking landlords? Amy, I'll let you answer this one. You can push it back to me if you'd like. What do you think of asking landlords, what are you doing for other tenants to survey where they stand? Meaning, how do you feel about just saying, hey, landlords, what are you doing for your other tenants?
I think there are situations that may be a valid question, but I think ultimately, other tenants aren't you. And you may not be in the same situation as someone else. And so, or maybe other tenants haven't reached out, and so maybe they're not doing anything for them. So I think really keeping this personal to yourself and explaining your situation for your own landlord is probably the place to start. If you're getting a lot of pushback, maybe there's a question there, but I would start by taking control of your own situation as opposed to what others are doing.
I completely agree, Amy. As you were talking, I was thinking about there's an aspect of that question that seems a little insincere, that it almost, like you want them to just offer something for nothing. And I don't think I said that very well, but that kind of raises my alarm, creates some alarms in my head. I think it's exactly what Amy said, that they're not you. I love that line. Your circumstance is personal to you, and go have the conversation based on what you need to be able to make your ends meet. I think that'll give you the best chance of success. This is a question that I've heard, and I'm actually gonna take this one, Amy, because it's one of my favorite questions.
Okay.
Tenants pay rent with a credit card? That is a question I get all the time. And the answer is it's really going to, it's going to be partly depends, but generally speaking, you're gonna hear from me that I recommend against it. And so why do I recommend against it? Number one, most often you're going to pay an extra fee. That landlord is going to charge you a convenience fee for the use of that credit card. Why do they do that? Because they get charged a fee when you use your credit card. They're not looking to make money on you, but the fact is to provide that convenience of a credit card, it costs extra money, and that's gonna be around 3%. So don't be surprised if your landlord says, okay, that's fine, but you owe me an extra $30 on your $1,000 rent. That's number one. Number two, if you did find yourself needing to pay rent with a credit card, be very careful about the credit card you're using to pay it. What many people don't understand or don't realize is that if you buy something on a credit card, you purchase a new shirt, and that credit card has a balance that you've carried over from last month. And so let's say that using Amy's example on that $1,000 credit card bill, you probably on that $1,000 credit card line, you've used $300 of it. Once you use that credit card, you'll begin to be charged interest by the credit card company from the moment you make that charge, even if you pay it off in full when the bill comes. And most people don't understand that. So if you do find yourself needing to pay rent with a credit card, make sure it's a credit card that doesn't have a balance on it, ideally. But be thinking about, don't punt on things like this. Don't shove the bad news down the road. If you have to use a credit card, there's no other way, then there's no other way. But just be aware that you are going to have to repay that. There are going to be some extra fees. Potentially there's going to be some interest. So that's my cautionary tale. Amy, anything that you want to add?
I don't have anything to add on that one. I think that was a great response.
Well, thank you. Let's see. What if I don't think I can pay? So the question, I'm not quite understanding it, but it says, what if I don't think I'm going to be able to pay my rent for the next 3 months and I'm employed? Again, I think your circumstance, all you can do, what you want to do is to describe your station, exactly what you're experiencing, why you're having financial difficulty. At the end of the day, whether you're employed or not employed, it still comes down to the same thing. Are you able to, you want to make sure you're making good on your obligations, including your rent. Pick up the phone, have that conversation, email that landlord and say, I can't pay and here's why, and I need an accommodation. Don't feel like you need to wear, a scarlet letter on your chest just because you still have your job. We have lots of people are still employed, but they have reduced hours. They have reduced income for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's their spouse, their partner, or their roommate that is affected that is putting the burden back on you. So don't be ashamed about that at all. Have the conversation, ask. Next question, and how are we doing on time? I think we're doing pretty good. We only have a couple more minutes. Can my past rental payment history help me now is the question. And I'll take that one because that's in RentReporters' wheelhouse. So absolutely, if you haven't reported your rent history, absolutely do that. It's what Amy has said over and over. I think she said it 5 times on this webinar. Your payment history is the most important factor in your score. So by reporting your past rent history that was paid timely, RentReporters is adding 2 years, and in some case 4 years of past rental history or payment history to the bureaus. That has a big impact. And so what we've seen in our average customer sees a 40-point score increase when they report that history. But that's going to make not just a positive effect on your credit score, it's going to create a thicker, more positive credit file, because now you're showing an obligation that is not only significant in its length of history, it's significant in the monthly amount that you're paying. Because again, as Amy said, for most of us, that's our single largest monthly expense. So the answer to that one is absolutely report your past rental history for sure. I think that is about all we're going to have time for today. Amy, is there anything, I think a couple of last takeaways for our group. Do you want to shout out the free credit score location again? Where to get it? Or free credit report, I'm sorry.
Free credit report. So get your free credit score through RentReporters if you aren't already. And in terms of your free credit report, you can get that as often as weekly for free at annualcreditreport.com through April 2021, after which you can get 1 free credit report a year, from each of the bureaus at that point.
Terrific. And for any of you that have additional questions that you want to submit, you're more than welcome to email me, and it's gonna be really easy. I'm gonna give you my email address. It's john@rentreporters.com. Oh, thank you, whoever put that up. There it is. And we will follow up with this group with an email as to where we can find some of the questions and answers, and we'll add some additional ones that we've come up with as well there. So I just want to say thank you very much. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
You did a great job. Such a great resource. We are just getting so grateful for TransUnion coming today and helping our audience, build the path forward. And that's just it, everybody. The world is going to get better. Keep building your financial life. Keep thinking ahead, and don't get stuck down in the situation you're in now. Take control of your destiny. Pick up that phone, punch out an email. Let's start asking for accommodations so that you can get your life back on track. So I hope this has been helpful for you all. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great day. Thank you, Amy.